I've heard quite a lot about this movie and knew what I was getting into going into it. So I was under no illusion. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a newer Netflix release, Deadly Illusions. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's jump right into it and let's talk about Deadly Illusions. This stars Kristin Davis as Mary, best-selling novelist suffering from writer's block who hires an innocent young woman named Grace, played by Greer Grammar, to watch over her twin children. As the novelist dangerously indulges in her new bestseller, the line between the life she's writing and the one she's living becomes blurred. This is written and directed by Anna Elizabeth James and was released on Netflix in the middle of March. I initially had no plans to check this one out, but then I started to hear about it, and I heard that it's not just bad, but really bad. And I've said this before, I try not to go out of my way for too many bad movies so that my channel is nothing but cheap shots, but when I hear a movie like this is particularly really awful, I can't help but be intrigued, as movies with a reputation for being this bad are quite an experience. And yeah, this is an experience, to say the least. Now, for a minute, I thought that this may have been the same team that was behind two other films distributed by Netflix, which were Secret Obsession and Fatal Affair. It turns out this isn't, but you'll be heavily reminded of those two films when watching this, if you've even seen either of them. This is very reminiscent of a Hallmark or Lifetime movie, with very cheesy, overly sentimental background music playing very loudly all the time. And it also has very on-the-nose dialogue, drenched in exposition, where characters have very long-winded conversations telling us exactly how they feel at every waking moment. A lot of it will feel very awkward and pretty cringeworthy, to be honest, especially for the way in which the characters sometimes react to some of the dialogue. There are times where it'll feel like two characters aren't even having the same conversation. Sometimes a character may say something that's supposed to be huge, yet whoever they're talking to will react too casually or with close to no emotion. A lot of the time, it felt like they were talking right past one another. And going hand in hand with that, the acting's pretty bad here, which is a shame because the main cast has people who you know can do better. Now, I can't speak for everyone, as I never actually saw Kristin Davis in anything before, and this is the first time I've heard of Greer Grammar, but you have DermontMulroney as Mary's husband, who's been solid in a number of films, yet he's in a totally thankless role here, where half the time he appears and tells Kristin Davis he loves her before disappearing for 20 minutes at a time. Plus, you also have Shanola Hampton, who was absolutely great in Shameless as Mary's friend, but she's mainly there to just react to things that we just saw in the previous scene. Like, something will happen to Kristin Davis, and then in the very next scene, we'll get a whole recap of what just happened where she's telling all this stuff to Shanola Hampton, who then just gives her thoughts, and that's the entire scene. And she totally goes to waste here. Though, I will say, if I had to pick a best performance of everyone here, it's easily Hampton, as she is very naturally charismatic. But otherwise, for the most part, a lot of the acting is rough to watch, which, to be fair, is partially due to a writing and directing issue, as is usually the case with most bad performances. And while, as I said, a lot of the conversations are way too casual given some of the subject matter, whenever the film does try to inject some emotion, that doesn't work either. Because characters will have these very sudden, drastic shifts in personality mid-scene that will be bizarre to watch, particularly with Kristin Davis. The most notable example is in this one scene, which she's accusing her husband and the babysitter, Grace, of sleeping together because she supposedly saw it. And when she very first makes the accusation, it's in a very furious way. But her very next line of dialogue will be, I saw it, in this incredibly whiny voice. It immediately kills the mood, going from very briefly intense to immediately silly. And while she's the biggest offender of this sort of stuff, we see this from most of the characters at one point or another, and it's very off-putting. It's almost like watching The Room at times, just with the way characters just don't click with one another whatsoever. Though of all the things this movie is, the best way to describe this film as a whole is melodramatic, as it tries infusing elements of a soap opera with this Fatal Attraction / Basic Instinct like thriller. But none of it works. Another thing, the whole fantasy and reality becoming blurred trope has become something grating to watch, mainly because the last few times I can recall a film utilizing that, it becomes totally incoherent. But as a filmmaker, you also need to have some things established and provide enough for the audience to work with in order to effectively pull that off, and we don't get that here whatsoever. It's established who these characters are, but beyond that, each scene becomes more confusing than the previous one. It gives us literally zero clues as to how much of this is actually happening and how much of it is in Kristin Davis's head. Like I said, we'll see her recapping many of these scenes to Shanola Hampton, but then it's questionable if even those actually happened. Meanwhile, we'll get subplots and side stories introduced for one scene, and then they'll just fizzle out, never to be revisited again, and characters will mention things that they're going through or make these references to events going on in their lives, only for nothing to ever be done with them. Plus, there's at least one brief moment where the film will sporadically shift point of view, because almost all of it is supposed to be through Kristin Davis's perspective, and we're supposed to see these events the way she would see them. Even when she thinks her husband and Grace are having an affair, it's because she thinks she sees it going on in the house. But then there's a random scene, for example, where she'll have no involvement whatsoever, and we see her husband and Grace at a diner flirting. But it's played very straightforward, unlike a lot of the sequences in which Kristin Davis is imagining them together. Yet the way the film acts afterwards, it's almost as if that didn't actually happen. And the film just never makes that clear, and the presentation is just all over the place, on top of an already incoherent story. There never feels like there's a consistency to any of it. And whatever we are able to understand, which is very little to be totally clear, it really isn't all that compelling, to be honest. It's mostly an hour and a half of Kristin Davis imagining these lustful scenarios, either of herself and her husband, or her and the babysitter, or the husband and the babysitter. But that's about it. There's not much to it, and it all feels like a lot of fluff, at least until we get to the ending. And as for the ending, I'm going to do something rare here that I don't normally do with new reviews, and I'm going to briefly get into spoilers, because we need to talk about that ending. It's difficult to properly discuss this film without getting into some details about it. So if you really want to know nothing, this is your spoiler warning. So go watch the movie, then come back to watch the rest of this video. So while the film does involve a lot of reality and fantasy getting blurred, it is ultimately a film that's meant to have some basis in reality, mainly centered around family drama. Whatever scenarios that Kristin Davis supposedly imagines aren't anything that are, in theory, totally unrealistic. But then by the end, it takes this rather bizarre twist, as Mary learns a little more about Grace after finding out that not everything about her is as it seems. And it's revealed towards the very end that Grace suffers from dissociative identity disorder, and as the other personality, she winds up killing Shanola Hampton and then tries to frame Kristin Davis, eventually also attacking DermontMulroney. And it's not so much the personality disorder itself that makes the twist bizarre, but to show her going back and forth between her two personalities, we'll hear her voice suddenly becoming demonic in a way whenever it's this other personality talking. It doesn't even sound like Greer Grammar is actually speaking. And I get what the film was going for by doing this, but as cheesy and melodramatic as the rest of the movie was, this is just tonally inconsistent from everything else that we've gotten. The film goes from trying to be somewhat realistic, as much as it failed to do so, to suddenly acting like a supernatural horror movie where Grace is possessed, rather than suffering from an actual disorder. It seems like something that belongs in a completely different movie, and it immediately takes you out of the moment. And what doesn't help either is that during the entire third act, the background music is this version of the kids' song Frere Jacques, which you hear some kids sing earlier on, but when it's used as background music in the final act, where we're getting all these reveals, it's supposed to come off as eerie and creepy, as if it did belong in a horror movie. But it just doesn't fit, and on top of that, it gets to the point of laughably bad. The way it's arranged, it reminded me heavily of the 1-2 Freddy's Coming For You song from A Nightmare on Elm Street, and you hear it so many times in the third act, almost on a loop. And when you hear that, in addition to Grace's demonic voice, you almost can't help but laugh. Like, this film totally goes off the deep end in these final few minutes. And the kicker is, it still doesn't even make everything 100% clear by the end. Because while all this is going on, we'll get these brief flashbacks where we see how Grace managed to get herself set up as the babysitter. And it's presented as if everything's all coming together now. But the thing is, we'll see how she lined everything up, but her actual motivations for why she was going after Mary in the first place are never revealed. Did she have a vendetta against her? Was there something about her that she noticed and didn't like? Who knows? We never get that. Nothing makes sense about this. And then, to make things even stranger, we get one final scene taking place a year later, after Mary subdues her, where Mary then goes to visit Grace at a mental hospital, and she's acting like she's over everything that she was put through. Like, it was no big deal that she framed her for murder. It's all good. And it's just very weird. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how characters will be way too casual about everything. Like, this was the most extreme case, and I was scratching my head by this point. The only thing I can really give this film credit for, besides Shanola Hampton's performance, is it is very confident in the way it presents itself, with everyone pretty committed to just how bizarre this whole thing is. It's at least commendable how everyone really went all in on this, I gotta say. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the film as a whole made no sense whatsoever. Deadly Illusions is mind-bogglingly bad. It's a total incoherent mess. If you did wind up liking this, then I apologize, but this just made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. The plot's incoherent, the motivations aren't made clear at all, the dialogue's either very awkward or too on the nose, characters will have all these very bizarre personality shifts, and it all comes together in one of the most laughably bad third acts I've seen in a film in quite some time. This is one of those movies that you may enjoy on a so bad it's good level, but I can't see too many people liking this one at all. Deadly Illusions gets a 0.5 out of 10. So let me know, did you see Deadly Illusions, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like this one at all? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.